Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick. I'm the Communications Officer at the U Trust, and in our series of podcasts, we have spoken to our CEO, Nikki Uren, we've spoken to Director Tonya Redvers, and today we're sitting with...
Phillip Freed, but just Phil. Just Phil. I'm only Philip when I'm in trouble.
Yes, I can understand that. It's the same as Nicholas.
Yes.
More syllables to shout. And I believe you became a director recently.
Yes, back in November. I am currently the Director of Care, Support and Community Wellbeing.
And what exactly does it entail? What does it cover?
So within the U Trust, that covers all of learning disability services in their entirety, mental health services, social prescribers, community legal and support with regards to sort of like consumer law. We've got a vice centre in Portsmouth that covers people dropping in for everything from rent arrears, everything from rent arrears to benefit claims. And in Dorset, we've got the Dorset Intervention Service, which is working with people in the Dorset community, home from hospital, connecting with their community. So quite a wide range and varied approach of work that we've got.
And that actually covers quite a few support workers and staff. I mean, the charity has, 750 people. And how many of those are under your purview as well?
In my department, in my area, I've got about 320.
That's quite a few people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a fair amount of people.
So what made you want to actually become... Because what were you doing before you were a director, sorry? What were you actually...
I was assistant director. Yeah, assistant director. So yeah, it's all like a natural progression. So I think really it's probably easier if I start in the beginning.
Yes,
for want of a better phrase.
Let's do a phase back to flashback down.
Which isn't that long, as colleagues, because I'm very young. 20 years ago, when I started in care, prior to that, I was working in Woolworths. So back to, do you remember Woolies?
Yes,
Woolworths?
I do. Yeah. We still have it in South Africa, right?
Do you?
Where were you based? Was this around Portsmouth area?
I lived in Portsmouth. I lived in Copner, so that's sort of like central Portsmouth, and I worked in Waterlooville. And I've been working there all the way through sort of college, so 16 to 18. I got to the age of 18. I'd done some travelling. I went and lived abroad for a few months, and came back, and I didn't really have a job. I went back to the job at Woolworths, but I didn't have a career. And I ended up getting involved in Woolworths, and my mum and dad were saying to me, look, if you're going to stay in retail, then stay in retail properly, get a career out of it, try to do,
become manager,
do something, don't just be on the shop floor. Mm. And it really didn't appeal to me very much. And my manager was a good close friend of the family, and he basically said to me, if you've not got a proper job by sort of next summer, I'm going to fire you because you need to get yourself sorted out. And proper, what he meant by that was, if you want to go management, we'll start that phase. And I really didn't want to do it. It wasn't what I wanted to do. But I liked working with people. I always have liked working with people. So I decided, and actually it's one of the few decisions I made on my own without anyone getting involved. I went down to Gun Wharf Job Fair, and that was back in 2001. And I met a lady at the job fair who was on the stand for, back then it was Southern Focus Trust. And she said, oh, you look keen. What do you know about learning disabilities? And I went, I don't even know what the words mean.
So what age are we talking about?
I was 20. I was 21.
Okay.
I'd say I lived a relatively sheltered middle class life. I'd had a good education, nothing special. I did well at school, really badly at college because I'd done well at school. And then sort of like just flitted about and didn't really do anything, didn't really have any direction. But I was only 21. It was quite evident I wasn't going to go to university. That was quite clear. And she started talking to me about learning disabilities, and ultimately it's about people. It's not about, do I want to work with learning disabilities? It's, do you want to work with people? So I thought, why not? Let's see what it's about, and at least find out more about it. So I went away. I arranged an interview with her for a couple of weeks later, did a little bit of research. And I'll say back then, the internet was not the internet now. So research meant you actually had to go and do something rather than read a book. And for the younger listeners, a book is a thing you find in libraries, and I'm not
paper in it,
absolutely. But so I actually did some proper research into it, and I did not extensively, but enough. 2 weeks later, I had the interview, and even back then, so back in 2001, there was a client, a service user, a person we support, whatever phrase you want to use, in the interview, on the panel.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'd never, although I had certainly met people with a learning disability before, I'd never met one in that sort of environment, and I'd never met one with
quite formal, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it didn't throw me. And I think that was the first indicator. Actually, do you know what? I think I might be okay doing this type of work. And I did the interview, and I never forget. I remember the lady's name, Sharon. I'm not breaking any rules there, Sharon. I won't give you her last name. I remember. I ended up supporting her for a while, but she asked me the question, I want to get married next summer and I don't know how to do that. Will you help me to do it? And what will you do to help me?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's the first question. And the answer I gave was, yes, I'll help you. I have not got a clue how someone gets married. So what we'll do is we'll find out together.
Oh, that's
nice. I say Google. We're not going to Google how do you get married because it wasn't this, but we'll research it together. And we did. And I don't know whether that was the thing that she certainly took a shine to me. And she did end up getting married, actually. And it took longer than a year, though. And it was just about having that connection with just talking to people. And it's not talking down to, people can think, the way people approach someone with a learning disability, specifically with a learning disability, when they know it, is that they can talk down or they use this fake voice. You often hear it when you encounter someone, how are you? And it's like, you just speak to people normally. If they don't understand you, they'll tell you. And if they don't understand you, it's your fault, not theirs. I think that's the key indicator. You're the one communicating and you need to be better at it. So that was that interview, and I was successful in the job, and I started 2 weeks later.
What is that job as?
That was as a support worker for adults with learning disabilities in the community. So there was no what they would call personal care. There was no personal care involved. It was mainly tenancy support work. So working with people to maintain their housing, working with people around debt, everything other than personal care, really. So maintaining relationships with neighbours. I did a lot of police work in my early days, working with the police, because we had some younger people who the community weren't particularly accepting of them. I think it stems back to the fact that people with a learning disability living in houses in the community was still a relatively new thing. It had only really been around for about 10 years, and a lot of people were getting used to it. The hospitals all discharged, I don't even know if that's the right word to use, but the hospitals essentially closed down in like the mid-80s, early 90s. And suddenly you had vast tracts of people that were no longer either in those hospitals and had no skills because everything had been done for them in the community, and they needed support, hence the reason all these support worker roles were coming around that sort of time. Or you had younger people who'd never gone into those hospitals also needed that support. So I did a lot of work around sort of like behavioural stuff, working with some of the younger people in the Portsmouth area, actually not far from where we are now, in Hilsey. And it was really eye-opening. I always knew, I come from quite a liberal background. I come from quite a sort of person-centred background. I don't mean person-centred with regards to the work, but a person-centred approach. My mum and dad are teachers.
Oh, okay.
And I've always been involved in something like, working with people, whether it was retail, volunteering, helping out my mum and dad at the school sort of thing. So like I say, a lot of the work that I was doing was working with younger people, so sort of like 20 to 30, integrating in the community and sort of like doing a lot of police involvement. On the other end of that, I was working with older people. Some of them, one of the guys I used to work with was in his 90s.
Oh, wow.
So like the absolute other end of the work. So I've always worked in services that have got quite a variety of people within them, And I think having a really versatile approach to communicating and really understanding the person you're communicating with is key to any relationship really, but specifically when someone's got a communication requirement that you're going to need to do. I did that for 3 years. I did that from about 2001 to the end of 2003, and I did that for 3 years, and I got a bit stale in the job. At the time, I've really reflected on this recently actually, but at the time I was like, this job's not for me. I've done it for 3 years, nothing changes, and it's really boring and this, that and the other, and I was only 24. I ended up getting a job working abroad. I was a holiday rep. So arguably working with people that were still trying to maintain their accommodation, but in a hot environment. And actually their behaviour was outrageous. So that's a whole other podcast.
I think that's
and I only did half a season. So I could several podcasts.
Where was
and
that
half
based?
a season. I was Cavos in Corfu.
Oh wow.
Yes, the belly of the beast. The belly of the beast. So I did that for half a season, and towards the end of the season. I had some personal changes in my life as well. I had a baby at that point as well. My ex-partner had a little girl. That little girl is now 18. And I came back to England needing a job because obviously I handed my notice in at the U Trust, and I ended up getting a job in Iceland for like 6 weeks whilst I was waiting for a DBS to come through. I ended up getting a job working back for the Southern Focus Trust at that point, but as a young person support worker.
Okay.
So I worked in young people's services in the hostel in the middle of Southsea for 6 young people, primarily all young girls. I'd say between the ages of 16 and 21. I did that for a couple of years. I did that for like 18 months nearly. And then my daughter was growing up, so I needed to have more of a 9 till 5. And then a vacancy became available in the young person's drop-in. So it's still working in homelessness, still with young people, but it was essentially a 9 till 5 job. And I did that for, goodness me, about 3 years. I did that till about 2007 in total. I think I was working in young people's services for about 4 years in total. And then I got to a point where I needed to make a decision on where I was going, because I was, I suppose, by my own recollection, by my own account, I was a successful support worker, but I needed that next step and the next challenge. I think that's why I left in the first place in 2003, and it was quite evident that I needed to make a decision now. I either needed to become a manager, fight and focus something, and go further, or leave and go down another route within care and have it more of a professional qualification behind me. So the management position came up within that service, and I wasn't successful. And I decided at that point, not being successful, I'd been the deputy of that service, but I wasn't selected as the manager. So I decided to hand my notice in. I went to university. And at the age of 27, that was a big jump. I had a 2-year-old little girl at that point, sorry. And it was a big decision. And I went and did a social work degree. So I did that for 3 years, but I stayed on the books of our Premier crew, so our internal relief bank, for that entire time at university. And in 2010, I qualified as a social worker. Had one interview with local authority to become a social worker, was unsuccessful, made one phone call to Premier crew saying, look, I need some work. I need one place, put me in one place for a bit of time. And as it happened, the service that I had started working in 2001 had a vacancy for some work. They had a bit of problems within the service, had some service delivery issues. So I was there for 2 weeks. The manager of the service had changed, a new manager had come in, and that manager asked if I would be a senior. We called them team leaders at that point. So I said, yeah, but I don't want to interview. I'm not interviewing.
That's a bad experience.
Yeah, I'm not interviewing. I'll do it for you, but I'm not going to interview. I probably shouldn't say this. And they said, okay. I said, but what I will say is if it was September, I said, if right now, if you give me the job, I promise you I don't take any leave till the new year. And I went, oh, that's a deal breaker. But originally, the initial was no, you can't do it. I'm not interested. So I said, okay then. So I carried on doing what I was doing, and then I had a phone call like 24 hours later saying, yeah, can you start Monday? So I did, and I knew the service. I knew almost all the service users, almost all the clients. I knew most of the staff. I was a team leader for 3 weeks. The other team leader was there, then couldn't handle notice for personal reasons. It wasn't because of me. And the manager that was managing the service went, okay, what are we going to do, sort of thing. I said, well, we'll be all right, just the two of us, won't we? She went, yeah, but we hired you because of that. I said, we'll be fine. And we were. I was the deputy manager after about a year in that service. And then we lost the contract through the tendering process, and we had like individual contracts that we managed. And then from there, basically what happened is it was quite evident that service wasn't making any money. It was quite a small service, and we had 2 older people that went into long-term care out of our service, so it suddenly wasn't financially viable. And White Wings had just opened up in Denmead, and it was a 15 bed property, 15 flats in a property with a sleeper and needed a manager. And at the time, Sally Hutfield, who's no longer with us, she approached me and said, look, Phil, you either stay and do this work for another year in Portsmouth and make it work, and if it doesn't work, we're going to have to make it redundant, or you hand it all back now and you go work in White Wings in Denmead. And I had another baby on the way at that point. You know, my partner at the time, she was pregnant, and so it was no brainer for me really. So I went to be the manager of White Wings, which is in its 10th year this year.
Oh, is it still going?
Well, my boy is 10 and he was born. My boy is 10 in September and he was born in the September after we opened.
Oh wow, okay.
So this is now April the 3rd was its 10th year.
And it's still running, is it?
Yeah, it's still running. Yeah.
And who?
Currently Fiona is the manager of it, and it's under the new contracts we won. It got retendered and we were successful in winning it. We've got it. In fact, when the tender is up, when that contract is up, it will be another 9 years. So when the tender, we'll have had that service for 19 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And as far as people living there, are they the same, or do you?
Yeah, see, yes and no is the short answer, because a lot of times when people think about, and I say people, I mean professionals as well, they talk about the sort of the accommodation as being temporary or permanent, and it's as temporary or permanent as where you live is, and where I live is. You know, I've lived in several houses in the last few years because of my circumstances. You know, so it's about the individual and what's meaningful for them. So we've had several guys that moved in there that have been quite young, stayed there for a couple of years because there's a sleep-in provision of support, and this is the same across a lot of the services, a sleep-in provision, and then they decided after a couple of years, you know what, I want to try and live on my own, and they do. There are other people that have moved in and they go, no, this is my home for life, thank you very much. You know, so yeah, it's been, White Wings will always have a special place in my heart because it was my service.
Yes.
I opened it up. On day one, I was there with 3 staff and no people living there. And they didn't move in until that was a Tuesday. And on the Saturday, people moved in on the Saturday. So we have 4 days with no people living in there.
Oh.
So we've got a real good opportunity to know the staff team. And now, I say 10 years later, it's still going strong. So.
And I mean, so it looks like you sort of decided, I'm going to stay in this, you know, and you obviously became manager, and then you became deputy director. When did that actually happen then?
Well, assistant director. Well, so I've had several different titles in that area. So we had different names. So locality manager, operations manager, and then it was assistant director. My colleague Steve and I were assistant directors. I think the reason that funnily enough, I was doing some training yesterday. I was delivering some training, and someone said to me, we're talking about positive behaviour support and dealing with people with behaviours that, what people in the old school would call challenging behaviour, but behaviours of concern. And someone said to me, I never introduce myself as a director to a lot of people because it's irrelevant, really. In that environment, I don't want people to treat me any differently. So I just said that I worked for the U Trust, and she said to me, "Are you a manager?" I went, "Yeah, I am." And she went, "So can you tell me how do you tell people to deal with, you know, if someone says about challenging behaviours, you know, what is?" And so I started talking about that. I said, "Look, I don't want people to think just because I'm a manager I haven't dealt with it. Arguably, I will say that I haven't dealt with it for the last couple of years, but I have done it. I spent a good 8 years. Yeah, absolutely. Essentially, yeah." And the other thing was she made the joke about going to the dark side, becoming a manager, and then she immediately sort of like, "Oh my God, what have I said?" sort of thing. I said, "No, I get what you're saying," and I think the reason that I wanted to be the reason for all of my progression, with regards to the focus of my work, is I've wanted to help as many people as I can, and as a support worker, I can help 10.
Yes.
As a manager of a service, I could support 20. As the manager of several services, I could support 80. You know, and it's about making decisions that affect people's lives for the better.
Well, that's what you said at the very beginning of this podcast. You said that you were actually sort of covering over 350 people plus.
About 320, yeah, I think it's around about that sort of
So that
mark.
Is literally an exponential sort of growth.
Well, that's just staff. I mean, individually, then we've got the people we support as well.
Yes. Exactly.
So, I mean, and I've always said it for a few years. My first job, in all of my roles really, hasn't really changed. Is my first job is to make everybody, without exception, safe. That's my role. The second part of my job is to make as many people as I can happy. They don't always go hand in hand.
That's true.
However, they generally do. Yeah, and happy is very subjective. I also appreciate that as well. Happy can mean different things to different people. But safety, and that's everybody. That's the staff, that's the other managers, that's the people we work with, that's family members, that's everybody. I've always had in the last 10 years, had a level of responsibility. Well, even as a support worker, I had a different type of responsibility. But I've always taken that responsibility on quite seriously. And yeah, I think that the director role came about at a time when, I mean, you can argue who's ever really ready for it, I suppose, is the real question. But it came about at a time I'd been, although I'd only been the assistant director for about a year, I'd been in that role under different names for about 3 or 4 years. And it was grueling. I'll be honest with you. That interview process was grueling. Whoever's listening to this, I was put through my paces, quite rightly. And it, for me, has been a really good opportunity for me to show what else I can do. Yeah. And I think the expansion of me taking on the services that aren't in my I suppose you use the phrase comfort zone. I don't really use that phrase because I don't really have a comfort zone. I just do whatever. But if you're going to put it on paper, suddenly I'm dealing with people who've got legal backgrounds as staff members. I'm dealing with people who work in mental health services, and I'm dealing with people that are working in intervention services and community support. And they're all very different from learning disabilities. But actually, if you pull it down to its basics, I'm working with people. And I've always worked with people, whether it's staff, whether it's other professionals. I enjoy interacting with people. I enjoy getting good results.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not always. Doesn't always work.
Sure, not always.
No, but it's not about, there's so many different types of phrases. Oh, it's not about how many times you fall over, but how many times you get up. Oh, it's not about that. What it's not about getting it wrong, because you're going to get it wrong. Yeah, and again, wrong is subjective. It's about how you then work out how to get it right. Yeah, and make sure you don't repeat the same thing. Yeah. And it's about working with people and having that approach, which is you find out what they want. You find out what you're being commissioned to do, find out where that marries in the middle, and 9 times out of 10 it does. And then you provide that service designed by the person who's receiving it. And that's as simple as that.
It's interesting, you mentioned obviously the service and being commissioned to do something. Now, you actually are now in charge of a very large commission that was given to us last year in March, isn't it? How was that as working with it now? Because it was a very large commission. I think you said it's for 10 years. We're in 9 years now.
It's the biggest undertaking that Hampshire County Council have ever done with regards to tendering.
And as a person who's just become a recent director and whatnot, does it not frighten you, but does it give you a challenge that you're looking forward to? Is it something new?
That is a very good question. So the answer to that question, I'm gonna be a bit political. I'm gonna go back a little bit first. So the actual tenders, when they were released, the contracts when they were released, I was part of the team that wrote them. So from day one, before we'd even won them, I knew what was in them. And I knew that the vast majority of what was in them was what we were already delivering. And what they'd done is they'd almost like firmed up some of the good work we were already doing. And there's some stuff that obviously we needed to develop. So I think that, I suppose the way you look at it is it daunting? Yes. There's no getting away from it. Doesn't matter how confident you are, doesn't matter how long you've been doing this for, there's a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. Now, it's not all me. I have a very, very, very competent, more than competent team that I absolutely trust inherently, and have worked with some of them for many years. So my colleague Steve, who was he was the assistant director with me, and he's now the assistant director to me being the director. I've worked with for 13 years. Oh, wow. And we've done a lot of work. At one point, he line managed me. Okay. Yeah. So we've done a lot of work together over lots of different projects with lots. So
you've got that sort of support almost built in there.
Absolutely.
Over a decade now.
Absolutely. And even within mental health services, I know the mental health managers because of the registration requirements. So I one of the things that I think always pays you dividends is just get known by the people you work with. Yeah. If someone asks you for something and you can do it, and it doesn't really matter how much effort it costs you, but if you can do it, just do it. Because it could mean something very much to them and might not mean an awful lot of effort on your part. But actually, they'll never forget that. Yeah? Get yourself seen, go to things, go to places. If you're worried about speaking in an event, go first, because I never ask you again after that. I always find that as the first thing to do. Always go first. Always go first, always get an action. Yeah, I'll take that action, and that's it. You never get asked again. But it's just about making yourself approachable. I'd be very disappointed if someone said to me, well, someone did say to me once, working with me was like walking on eggshells, and I really reflected on that.
Was that recent? It
was in a couple of years ago, yeah. And I'm quite a reflective. I don't say reflective practitioner. I reflect a lot on what's happened and what people say to me. I don't automatically go, well, it's your fault if you feel like that. I actually think about how I've influenced that situation. And I really took that away. And I asked a few people about it. And the response I got back was, no, not at all, Phil. And one person said, well, no, you're not eggshells, but sometimes you're a bit like a whirlwind. I went, yeah, no, I can relate to that. And actually, I did reflect on it. I did reflect that it's actually her issue, not mine, the person who said it. But I'm not big enough to think that there's not something that I can take away from that. It's like when I deal with any complaints or comments or concerns, even if it's 100% not accurate or not upheld, there's always something we can take away from it. Whether it's about our own communication that wasn't effective enough, or we didn't didn't give the people the right information. But I'm known within the circle and realms of the work that we do, I take part in the forum, so I'm known within the other organisations in Portsmouth, as are people in those organisations. It's not unique to me. Social services, we have a very good partnership working with them both in Hampshire and Portsmouth, and in Dorset. I can't take any credit for the Dorset because I'm very new in that area, but Hampshire and Portsmouth, we've got very, very strong relationships with, so much so that I've been asked to be part of safeguarding pilots for Portsmouth City Council and worked with them and put up in a hotel and, representing all service providers in Portsmouth. And I made it very clear that I'm happy to do that, but I am only one service provider. And they said, no, we're quite happy with your input. So, those sort of things, and they make a difference.
Yeah.
I also got accused of being a yes man once as well, by the same person, funnily enough. Now, that is quite amusing because I wouldn't describe myself as a yes man. I say yes when I should say yes, and say no very positively when I want to say no.
Possibly why they misunderstand that you're still actually saying no.
But again, I think it goes back to if you can do it, do it. Why make a fuss?
Yeah. Oh,
yeah. I think it's that approach. It's if it's doable, then it should be done, because it's the way I would want someone to deal with me. I'm a big believer in if you get what you give back, and I know it's an old adage, but it's true. Working with people is the most easiest thing in the world and the most difficult thing in the world in the same sentence, because people are complex, people are difficult, people are funny, people are easy to work with, and they can all be that in the same conversation. And it's about understanding that, and it's about just making sure that people are clear about what you're there for, what you want, or whatever you're there for.
No, that is very interesting, and also very interesting past. And obviously now you've become director. You have this large contract that was picked up last year. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'm just curious, what big things do you have that you want to do in the position you are at the moment? You just mentioned now that you are not quite representing other service providers, but you have been in that small role or have been asked once or twice. What are you looking forward to?
Moving forward,
let's say the next 2-3 years.
Oh, goodness me, next 2-3 years. I think that the biggest challenge we've got in the next few years is just working in care in general, because of the world that we live in. And that's not just in learning disabilities or mental health, that's across the board in all areas. In fact, arguably, it's easier in statutory services than it is in some of the non-statutory services because there's a local authority responsibility. We're going to get through it. Everyone's going to get through it because we have to, because there's no option. We have to get through it. And we will, and we'll come out the other side of it in a much better place. And I think that without, not going into politics, I appreciate that's not what this is about, but the world is going to look very different in a couple of years. And I think that it's going to be still difficult. I think it would be silly to think everything's going to be solved. It's going to be very difficult, probably very difficult to begin with. But for me, I think that the work that we're doing has to continue to the high standard that we're doing it. We can't let our standards drop because the world around us is falling apart. And it has been. I think that the work that I want to reflect on, so I promised I wouldn't talk about it, but I'm going to do COVID. We had, as an organisation, such a professional response to COVID that infections were at such a low that other organisations, social services, were saying to me, "Are you sure these stats are correct?" I went, "Yes, we didn't have an infection in White Wings until the end of year 2. Yeah, and then unfortunately, we had someone pass away, but that was for respiratory. She had underlying health conditions, and I think that only is done by the people at the top that were making the decisions about how we move forward, and most importantly, by the people doing the support. I am humbled by the work that was done during that time. I wasn't doing it, and I'm not going to even suggest that I was. For the vast majority of the time, I was locked away in an office doing sort of the risk assessment side to it. So I had a part to play, but a very different part to play. And the challenges that we faced with regards to PPE, regards to staff being scared, not knowing, lack of information, the wrong information, all of that, the work that we did during that time. And that was reflected across other organisations as well, but only talking for our one, it was, like I said before, it was humbling, the work that was done. And I think that we need to monopolise on that. I think indeed the NHS needed to be clapped every Thursday, as did my staff every day, because they were out there doing it every day. And where we couldn't support people because they were unwell, we worked flexibly around that. We did doorstep support, we did telephone support, we would just go food shopping for somebody. We made sure that people had the right resources to do things and access to services. So, yeah, I think moving forward, so that was your actual question, I went back a little bit. Moving forward, I think that the digitisation of care is a big thing. That's going to be done by the end of 2025. And that's going to have a big difference on the work that we do. Hopefully, it will have a difference with regards to being able to provide different type of support. So we'll be able to more hands-on and not have to worry about admin and things like that. That's good. And I want to see, if I had to pick one area for the development, I would say employment. I want to see us really work around areas of employment for adults with learning disabilities and for mental health services. In fact, vulnerable people in general, autism and other neurodivergent conditions. And I think that we've got real opportunities to make some differences in both Portsmouth and Hampshire and Dorset around that. And as an employer of quite a few hundred people, we've got responsibility to do that as well. And that's the way I'd like to see that move forward.
No, absolutely. I mean, we've got the Interwork service, of course, which is slowly growing out, and yeah, I think the next couple of years will be very interesting to see what happens with you, quite frankly.
Yes, well, we shall see, shan't we?
But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And I look forward to the next podcast.
Thank you.
Awesome.